They thought it was the perfect joke. Julian and his cruel mother, Beatrice, spent weeks planning the seating chart for the wedding of the century. They placed table 19 right next to the swinging kitchen doors and the bathroom's the shame corner. That was where they put Annie, Julian's discarded ex-wife. They wanted her to watch him marry a senator's daughter from the worst seat in the house. They wanted her to feel small, poor, and broken. They expected her to show up in her old rusted sedan crying into a cheap handkerchief. But when the engine of a customized Bentley Mulsanne roared outside the church, silencing the entire crowd, Julian realized, too late, the woman he threw away didn't just move on. She moved up. And the man holding her hand, he didn't just have money. He owned the very ground Julian was standing on. The envelope was heavy, cream-colored, and embossed with gold leaf. It screamed old money prestige and arrogance. It landed in Annie Reed's mailbox on a rainy Tuesday, looking entirely out of place in her modest, nondescript apartment complex in the quiet side of Seattle. Inside, the calligraphy was sharp and aggressive. You are cordially invited to the wedding of Julian Thorne and Isabella Banks. The Cathedral of St. Mark. Reception to follow at the Sterling Grand Hotel. Annie stared at the invitation, her fingers tracing the raised lettering of Julian's name. It had been 3 years. 3 years since Julian had thrown her clothes into garbage bags. 3 years since his mother, Beatrice Thorne, had stood in the doorway of their home, sneering, "Finally my son is free of this dead weight. Go back to the gutter, Annie. It's where you belong." Annie hadn't fought back then. She had been 24, working 2 waitress jobs to put Julian through law school, exhausted and naive. She had believed them when they said she wasn't good enough. But that was 3 years ago. 3,000 miles away, in a high-rise office overlooking the Boston skyline, Julian Thorne was currently laughing. He was leaning back in his leather chair, tossing a stress ball to his best man and law partner, Greg. "You actually sent it?" Greg asked, raising an eyebrow. "You invited Annie, isn't that risky? What if she makes a scene?" Julian smirked, checking his reflection in the window. "That's the point, Greg. She won't make a scene. Annie is a mouse, a pathetic, quiet little mouse. Mother and I agreed we need closure, and by closure I mean I need to see her face when she sees Isabella." "Isabella is a senator's daughter, Julian," Greg noted. "She's out of Annie's league." "Exactly," Julian said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. "Annie supported me when I was nobody. Now that I'm a junior partner at Thorne and Associates, about to marry into political royalty, I want her to see what she missed out on. It's poetic justice. She held me back. Now she gets to watch me fly." Julian's phone buzzed. It was his mother, Beatrice. "Did you check the seating chart, darling? I made the adjustment." Julian chuckled, typing back. "Table 19, by the service entrance." "Perfect." Beatrice Thorne was a woman who wore pearls like armor and viewed empathy as a character flaw. She was currently at the venue, the Sterling Grand Hotel, terrorizing the wedding planner. "No, no, no," Beatrice barked at the terrified young woman holding a clipboard. "I said table 19 needs to be further back, behind the pillar. I want the view obstructed. The guest sitting there should have to crane her neck just to see the head table. She is a non-entity, a ghost from the past." "Mrs. Thorne." The planner stammered. "That table is right next to the waiter's station. The clattering of plates will be very loud. And it's next to the restrooms." "Did I stutter?" Beatrice snapped her eyes cold behind her designer glasses. "She is trash, and she will sit with the trash. If she has the audacity to show up, she will learn her place. She's coming to beg, I guarantee it. She probably thinks Julian will take pity on her and write her a check. We are going to make sure she understands that the door to this life is slammed shut. Back in Seattle, Annie was still holding the invitation. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shaking. Her hand was perfectly steady. A shadow fell over her shoulder. A man tall with broad shoulders and eyes the color of stormy oceans leaned against the doorframe of her study. He was wearing a casual cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Julian's entire wedding tuxedo. "Is that it?" the man asked, his voice a low, rumbling baritone. "It is," Annie said softly, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips. "They actually invited me, Silas. They think I'm still the waitress who counts tips to buy bread." Silas Sterling walked over, taking the invitation from her hand. He read it, and a dark amusement danced in his eyes. "The Sterling Grand Hotel," he read aloud. "Excellent choice of venue. The service there is impeccable. I should know." Annie laughed, a sound that was light and free. "Do you think they know that you're the lead developer of the Artemis AI algorithm that just sold to Google for 9 figures? Or that you're currently my fiancé?" Silas kissed the top of her head. "No, they don't know anything, Annie. People like Julian and Beatrice only see what they want to see. They see the past." "They put me at table 19, Annie said, flipping the RSVP card over where someone, likely Beatrice, had scrawled the table number in red ink, a violation of all etiquette. "I looked up the floor plan of the ballroom. Table 19 is the overflow table. It's the humiliation seat." Silas's expression hardened. The warmth vanished, replaced by the ruthless intensity that made him one of the most feared billionaires in the global market. "They want to shame you," he said quietly. "They want to drag you into the mud." "Let them try," Annie whispered, standing up. She walked to the closet and pulled out a garment bag. She unzipped it slightly, revealing a flash of deep emerald green silk, a custom creation by Versace, tailored specifically for her. "I'm not going there to beg, Silas. I'm going there to bury them." Silas grinned, pulling out his phone. "Well then, I suppose I should make a call. If we're going to a wedding at my hotel, we should arrive in style. I'll have the jet prepped for Boston. And Annie, yes, I'll have the Bentley brought around, the black edition." The wedding day was perfect. At least that's what Beatrice Thorne kept telling everyone. The sun was shining over Boston. The Cathedral of St. Mark was adorned with $10,000 worth of white lilies, and the press was waiting outside. Julian stood at the altar, sweating slightly in his bespoke tuxedo. He looked handsome in a plastic-manufactured sort of way. His best man, Greg, nudged him. "Relax. You look like you're on trial," Greg whispered. "I just want everything perfect," Julian hissed. "Is she here?" "Isabella." "No, you idiot." "Annie." Greg scanned the pews. The church was filling up with Boston's elite judges, politicians, old money families. "I don't see her. Maybe she chickened out. It's a long flight from Seattle for a waitress." "She'll come," Julian said confidently. "She's obsessed with me." Outside the cathedral, the atmosphere was buzzing. Valets were parking Porsches, Mercedes, and limousines. Beatrice was standing near the entrance greeting guests, ensuring the photographers got her good side. "Senator Banks." "So glad you could make it," Beatrice cooed, shaking the hand of the bride's father. "It's a glorious union. Let's just get on with it." "Beatrice," the senator grunted. He wasn't entirely sold on Julian. He found the young lawyer too ambitious and slightly slimy, but his daughter was in love, so he was paying the bill. Suddenly, the chatter on the sidewalk died down. Even the traffic on the street seemed to hush. Turning the corner was a car that didn't just drive, it glided. It was a Bentley Mulsanne extended wheelbase painted in a matte midnight black that seemed to absorb the sunlight. It was a vehicle that commanded authority. It was flanked by 2 black SUVs with tinted windows security detail. "Who is that?" Beatrice whispered, adjusting her glasses. "Did we invite a foreign diplomat?" The senator looked intrigued. "That's a custom chassis. You don't see those often. That's serious money." The convoy stopped right in front of the red carpet, blocking the entrance for everyone else. A valet rushed forward to open the door, but a massive bodyguard from the trailing SUV stepped out first. He wore an earpiece and a suit that struggled to contain his muscles. He held up a hand to the valet. "I've got it," the bodyguard said. The church steps were silent. Guests stopped midway to the door. Julian, hearing the commotion, actually stepped away from the altar and peeked out the side door. The bodyguard opened the rear door of the Bentley. First, a pair of heels hit the pavement. They were Christian Louboutin, unmistakable with their red soles studded with crystals. Then the woman emerged. Beatrice gasped, "No, it can't be." Annie Vance stood in the sunlight. She looked nothing like the exhausted, grey-faced girl Julian had divorced. Her skin was glowing, the result of expensive dermatology and a stress-free life. Her hair, once tied back in messy buns, cascaded in rich, glossy waves over her shoulders. She wore a dress that was borderline scandalous for a church, but perfect for revenge. It was a deep emerald green silk that clung to every curve, elegant yet undeniably powerful. She wore diamonds, real ones, at her throat and ears. But it was the way she stood that shocked Beatrice the most. She stood with her chin high, looking at the cathedral, not with fear, but with amusement. "Is that Annie?" Greg whispered, standing behind Julian at the side door. "Dude, she looks incredible." Julian felt a knot of jealousy tighten in his stomach. This wasn't the plan. She was supposed to look pathetic. She was supposed to be wearing something from a discount rack. "Who paid for that?" Julian hissed. "She must have found a sugar daddy. Disgusting." Then the other side of the Bentley opened. Beatrice watched, mouth slightly open, as a man stepped out. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a Tom Ford suit that fit him like a second skin. He adjusted his cuffs, checked his watch, a Patek Philippe, and walked around the car to Annie. He didn't look at the crowd. He didn't look at the church. He only looked at her. He offered her his arm, and she took it. A murmur rippled through the crowd of Boston elites. "Is that? It looks like him. No, it can't be. He never comes to social events." Senator Banks, standing next to Beatrice, suddenly went pale. "Good God, that's Silas Sterling." Beatrice turned to the senator. "Who is he famous?" The senator looked at Beatrice like she was an idiot. "Beatrice, look at the name on the hotel where you're holding the reception. The Sterling Grand. That man owns the hotel. He owns the bank that finances my campaigns. He owns half the tech sector on the East Coast. He is a billionaire 3 times over." Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "And he's with Annie." Annie and Silas began to walk up the steps. As they passed, Annie paused. She lowered her sunglasses, locking eyes with her ex-mother-in-law. "Hello, Beatrice," Annie said, her voice smooth as velvet. "Lovely day for a wedding. I hope you saved me a seat." Beatrice couldn't speak. She just gaped like a fish out of water. Silas didn't even acknowledge Beatrice's existence. He just guided Annie forward, the crowd parting for them, like the Red Sea. Inside the church, as Annie walked down the aisle to find a seat, the whispers were deafening. Julian, back at the altar, watched her come in. He saw the way the light caught the diamonds on her neck. He saw the way Silas Sterling, a man Julian had studied in business magazines, a man he idolized, placed a protective hand on the small of her back. Julian looked at his bride Isabella, who was just arriving at the back of the church. Isabella was pretty, yes, but she looked ordinary compared to the woman who had just walked in. "This is a mistake," Julian muttered to himself. But the real humiliation hadn't even started yet. The ceremony was just the appetizer. The main course would be served at the reception at table 19. The interior of the Cathedral of St. Mark was designed to make humans feel small. High vaulted ceilings, stained glass, depicting judgment and redemption, and the smell of frankincense filled the air. But for Julian Thorne, the only thing he felt was a suffocating heat rising up his collar. He stood at the altar waiting for Isabella. The organ music swelled Wagner's bridal chorus, but Julian's eyes weren't on the heavy oak doors at the back where his bride would appear. They were darting to the third row on the left. Annie sat there. She hadn't taken a seat in the back as a shamed ex-wife should, because she was with Silas Sterling, and Silas Sterling did not sit in the back. An usher intimidated by Silas's sheer presence and the terrifying cut of his jawline had escorted them to the VIP section reserved for distinguished guests. Julian watched as Silas leaned in and whispered something into Annie's ear. Annie smiled a genuine, radiant smile that Julian realized with a pang of bitterness he hadn't seen in the last 2 years of their marriage. She looked expensive. She looked untouchable. "Stop staring," Greg hissed, nudging Julian in the ribs. "Here comes the bride." Julian snapped his head forward. Isabella Banks was walking down the aisle. She looked beautiful in a Vera Wang gown, flanked by her father, the senator. But the air in the room had shifted. The guests were physically facing the aisle, but their eyes kept flickering toward the third row. The whispers were like a low-frequency hum under the organ music. "Is that really the owner of the Sterling Group? Who is the woman? Is that Julian's ex, I heard? He bought her that necklace at an auction in Geneva." Beatrice Thorne, sitting in the front row on the groom's side, was gripping her prayer book so hard her knuckles were white. She had spent months crafting this narrative. Julian was the golden boy, and Annie was the mistake. Now the mistake was outshining the masterpiece. Beatrice turned her head slightly, shooting a look of pure venom at Annie. Annie caught the look. She didn't flinch. She simply raised one perfectly arched eyebrow, as if to say, "Is that all you have?" The ceremony was a blur for Julian. He missed his cue for the vows and had to be prompted by the priest. When he said, "I take the Isabella," his voice cracked. He felt like a fraud. When the priest finally announced, "You may kiss the bride," Julian leaned in, but his mind was elsewhere. As he pulled away and turned to face the congregation, as a married man, his eyes locked with Silas Sterling's. Silas wasn't clapping. He was sitting perfectly still, legs crossed, watching Julian with the cold, clinical detachment of a predator watching a wounded gazelle. It was a look that said, "I know what you did, and I know what you're about to do." As the recessional music played Mendelssohn's Wedding March, Julian and Isabella walked back up the aisle. As they passed the third row, Annie applauded politely. "Congratulations, Julian," she said softly. Her voice carried over the music, clear and melodic. Isabella, beaming and oblivious to the history, smiled. "Thank you." Julian couldn't speak. He hurried his new wife past them, desperate to get out of the church, desperate to get to the reception where he was in control, where the seating chart was set, where Annie would be put in her place. Outside, the fresh air didn't help. The senator pulled Julian aside while the photographers set up. "Julian," the senator said, his voice low and serious, "why is Silas Sterling at my daughter's wedding? You didn't tell me you knew him." I don't, sir," Julian stammered. "He's the +1 of my ex-wife." The senator stared at him. "Your ex-wife is dating the man who holds the mortgage on half of Boston. You told me she was a waitress. She was. She is, Julian insisted, sweat beading on his forehead. I don't know what's going on. It's a trick. She's probably rented him for the day. The senator looked at the Bentley, waiting at the curb, then back at his new son-in-law with visible disgust. Men like Silas Sterling don't get rented, Julian. Fix this. I don't want a scene at the reception. Don't worry, Beatrice interjected, appearing suddenly at their side, adjusting her fascinator. At the reception she'll be invisible. We've put her where she belongs. Once Mr. Sterling sees how we treat her and where she sits, he'll realize he's dating social suicide. He'll dump her before the cake is cut. Beatrice's smile was brittle. We are going to the Sterling Grand. That is our turf for the night. Little did she know she was walking straight into the Lion's Den. The Sterling Grand Hotel was a masterpiece of Art Deco architecture. Gold leaf ceilings, marble floors, and crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen fireworks. It was the most expensive venue in the city. The cocktail hour was in full swing in the foyer outside the grand ballroom. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne and escargot. The atmosphere was jovial, but the undercurrent of gossip was electric. Everyone was waiting for the arrival of the couple from the Bentley. When Annie and Silas walked in, the room didn't just quiet down, it gravitated. People practically leaned toward them. Beatrice stood by the entrance to the ballroom with a clipboard-wielding planner. She saw them approaching. This was the moment. The check-in. Name? Beatrice asked loudly, even though she knew exactly who they were. She wanted the guests nearby to hear. Annie Reed, Annie said calmly. And guest. Beatrice ran her finger down the list, taking an agonizingly long time. Reed. Ah, yes. Here you are. She pulled a small escort card from the table. She held it out with 2 fingers as if it were contaminated. Table 19, Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. It's in the rear alcove. We were tight on space, you understand. It's a bit cozy. Annie took the card. She didn't look at it. She handed it to Silas. Silas looked at the card. Table 19. He looked up at Beatrice, his eyes narrowing slightly. Then he looked past her, into the ballroom. The doors were open. The ballroom was magnificent, set for 300 people. Tables 1 through 10 were clustered around the dance floor, prime real estate. Tables 11 through 18 fanned out from there. And then there was table 19. It was located in the far back corner, directly next to the swinging double doors of the kitchen. Every time a waiter would come out, the occupants of table 19 would be hit with a blast of noise and the smell of industrial dish soap. To make matters worse, it was also situated right next to the corridor leading to the restrooms. It was the table for the unwanted. Beatrice smirked. If you need help finding it, I can have a busboy show you the way. Silas didn't answer. He turned to Annie. Shall we? Annie nodded. Lead the way. They walked into the ballroom. The guests watched them. Beatrice followed a few steps behind, eager to witness the humiliation. They walked past the head table, past the ice sculpture, past the chocolate fountain. They kept walking until they reached the dark, noisy corner. Table 19 was smaller than the others. It had a wrinkled tablecloth. The centerpiece was noticeably smaller, a single wilting rose compared to the lush bouquets on the other tables. It was an insult given physical form. Silas pulled out a chair for Annie. She sat down, her emerald dress pooling around her on the cheap carpet. Silas sat next to her. Immediately the kitchen doors swung open. A waiter rushed out with a tray of dirty dishes, nearly clipping Silas's shoulder. The clatter was deafening. Beatrice, standing a few feet away, covered her mouth to hide a laugh. Is everything comfortable? I can ask them to try and be quieter, but the kitchen is so busy tonight. Silas ignored her. He raised his hand. He didn't wave. He didn't shout. He simply held up 2 fingers. A passing waiter, a young man named Timothy, stopped. He looked annoyed at first, ready to tell the guest to wait for service. Then he looked at Silas's face. Timothy froze. The tray in his hand shook. "Sir," Timothy squeaked. "Get me Caldwell," Silas said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. "Mr. Caldwell, sir. The general manager." "Now." Timothy dropped his tray on a nearby service stand and literally ran toward the kitchen. Beatrice frowned. "Who do you think you are? You can't just order the staff around. Mr. Caldwell is a busy man running my son's wedding." "Your son's wedding?" Silas said, finally looking at her. "In my building." Before Beatrice could process that, the kitchen doors flew open again. But this time it wasn't a waiter. It was Marcus Caldwell, the general manager of the Sterling Grand, a man who terrified his staff and was known for his impeccable composure. Right now, Marcus Caldwell looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He was pale, sweating, and buttoning his jacket as he sprinted across the room. "Mr. Sterling," Caldwell gasped, arriving at table 19 and bowing deeply. "Sir, we had no idea. The VIP list. Your name wasn't on the manifesto. If we had known you were coming—" Beatrice's jaw dropped. "Mr. Caldwell, what are you doing? This is just a guest." Caldwell whipped around, his eyes wide with panic. "Mrs. Thorne, be quiet. This is Silas Sterling. He owns the Sterling Hotel Group. He owns this building. He signs my paycheck." The silence that fell over the nearby tables was absolute. Beatrice felt the room spin. Caldwell turned back to Silas, wringing his hands. "Sir, please allow me to move you. We have the presidential suite balcony available. Or I can have a table set up on the dance floor immediately. Please, you cannot sit here. This table, it's for the—" Caldwell trailed off, looking at the location near the bathroom. "It is not suitable." Silas leaned back in the creaky chair. He picked up the cheap wilting rose from the centerpiece and twirled it in his fingers. "No, Marcus," Silas said calmly. "We won't be moving." "Sir, Mrs. Thorne selected this seat for us specifically," Silas said, his voice carrying to the stunned onlookers. "She spent a great deal of time planning this seating chart. She wanted us right here, next to the trash, next to the noise." Silas looked at Beatrice. Her face was grey. "I wouldn't want to be rude and reject her hospitality." Silas continued. "We will stay at table 19, but Marcus—" "Yes, Mr. Sterling, anything. I want full service here, and when I say full service, I mean I want the 1982 Petrus brought up from the private vault. I want the chef to come out here and take our order personally. And I want the security team to ensure that no one," he paused, looking at Beatrice, "interrupts our dinner, especially not the hosts." "Immediately, sir," Caldwell barked. He snapped his fingers and suddenly 6 waiters descended on table 19. Within seconds, the wrinkled tablecloth was whisked away and replaced with fresh, heavy linen. Crystal glasses appeared. Silverware was polished. A velvet rope was brought out and placed around table 19, effectively turning the shame corner into a VIP lounge. The spotlight had shifted. The head table where Julian and Isabella were just sitting down was now irrelevant. The entire room was watching the bustling activity at the back corner. Julian stood up, furious. "What is going on back there? Why is the manager serving Annie?" Beatrice stumbled back to the head table, clutching her chest. "Julian," she whispered, her voice trembling. "We made a mistake. A terrible mistake." "What do you—" "That man," She pointed a shaking finger at Silas, who was now being poured a glass of wine worth $5,000 by the head sommelier. That's the landlord, and I think we just declared war on him. Annie took a sip of the wine Silas offered her. She looked across the velvet rope at Beatrice and Julian. She raised her glass in a mocking toast. The shame corner had just become the throne room, and the wedding reception hadn't even started yet. The dinner service was a surreal experience for the 300 guests at the Thornbanks wedding. While the majority of the room was served the standard chicken or fish option, plated efficiently but unremarkably, table 19 was a spectacle of culinary excess. A private chef had wheeled a cart to the back corner and was carving a Wagyu tomahawk steak tableside. The aroma of truffle butter and seared beef wafted across the room, overpowering the smell of the rubbery chicken being served to the senator's family at table 1. Julian sat at the head table, his fork stabbing aggressively into a green bean. He was seething. Every few minutes, a guest would accidentally wander past table 19 to get a look at Silas Sterling, ignoring the bride and groom entirely. "He's doing this on purpose," Julian muttered, chugging his champagne. "He's mocking me in my own wedding." Isabella, who had been crying in the bathroom 10 minutes prior because her special day was being hijacked, hissed, "Then do something, Julian. You're the man of the hour. Go over there and tell him to have some respect." "I can't." Julian snapped his voice, rising. "He owns the building, Isabella. If I make a scene, he could kick us all out. Do you want your reception in the parking lot?" Beatrice leaned in her face, a mask of forced composure. "Ignore them. It's almost time for the speeches. Once the best man speaks, the focus will be back on you. We control the microphone. We control the narrative." The DJ, sensing the awkward energy in the room, quickly faded the music. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, it's time for the toasts." Greg, the best man, took the microphone. He was sweating. He delivered a stuttering, generic speech about Julian's hard work and dedication, trying desperately not to look at the billionaire staring at him from the back of the room. The applause was polite, tepid. Then the maid of honor spoke. Then the senator. The speeches were boring, safe, and forgettable. And finally, the DJ announced, "The groom would like to say a few words." Julian stood up. This was his chance to reclaim the night. He buttoned his jacket and took the mic. He flashed his winning courtroom smile. "Thank you all for coming." Julian began, his voice booming. "Tonight is about love. It's about upgrading." He laughed at his own joke. A few people chuckled nervously. "It's about finding the person who matches your ambition, your class, and your future. Isabella, you are that future. I am so glad I left the past behind to find you." He paused for effect, glancing meaningfully toward the back of the room, toward Annie. It was a subtle dig, but everyone understood it. "I left the trash behind." "To the future?" Julian raised his glass. "To the future," the crowd echoed. Julian grinned. He had done it. He had taken the high road screech. The sound of a chair scraping against the floor echoed through the silent ballroom. It came from table 19. Silas Sterling was standing up. He didn't have a microphone, but he didn't need one. He had the kind of voice that projected to the back row of a boardroom. He picked up his wineglass, the vintage Petrus, and began to walk toward the center of the room. The DJ, terrified of offending the hotel owner, scrambled to hand Silas a wireless microphone. Silas took it with a nod. "A lovely speech, Julian," Silas said. His tone was smooth, dark, and terrifyingly calm, touching really, especially the part about leaving the past behind. Julian froze. His heart hammered against his ribs. "Silas," he warned, his voice shaking. "This is a private reception. Is it?" Silas looked around at the gold-leafed ceiling. "It feels like a public forum to me. And since we are toasting to the future, I thought I should add a few words. After all, I am sitting in the special seat your mother so kindly reserved for us." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd. Beatrice shrank into her chair. Silas turned to the guests, turning his back on Julian. "For those who don't know me, my name is Silas Sterling, and the woman sitting at table 19, the one next to the men's room, is Annie Reed." All eyes turned to Annie. She remained seated, sipping her wine, looking like a queen on a throne. 3 years ago, Silas continued, pacing slowly like a panther. Annie was working double shifts to pay for Julian's bar exams. She was cooking his meals, ironing his shirts, and editing his legal briefs. She was the foundation upon which he built his ambition. And when he passed the bar and got his first big job, he decided she didn't fit the aesthetic of his new life. The room was deadly silent. The senator looked furious. Isabella looked sick. So he discarded her. Silas said, his voice dropping an octave, like an old coat. And today he invited her here not to share in his joy, but to rub her face in it. He put her at a table designed to humiliate her. Silas turned back to Julian. The billionaire's eyes were cold fire. "But here is the irony, Julian. You wanted to show Annie what she missed out on, but all you've done is show everyone here exactly who you are. You're a man who needs to stand on a woman's neck to feel tall." "That's enough," Julian shouted, stepping off the dais. "Get out, I don't care who you are. Get out of my wedding." Silas smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "I'm leaving," Silas said. "The air in here is stale. But before I go, there is one small piece of business we need to address. A wedding gift, if you will." Silas gestured to the back of the room. "Annie!" Annie stood up. She walked toward Silas, her emerald dress flowing around her. She didn't look at Julian. She looked at the senator. "Senator Banks," Annie said, her voice clear and professional, "I believe you are currently reviewing a proposal for the implementation of AI traffic management systems for the city of Boston, a contract worth $40 million. The senator blinked, caught off guard. Yes, we are in talks with a firm called Artemis Tech." "Correct," Annie said. "And I believe Julian's law firm, Thorne & Associates, is representing the bid. Julian has been bragging all week that closing the Artemis deal will secure his partnership." Julian went pale. "How do you know that?" "Because Julian." Annie smiled, and it was the sharpest thing in the room. "I am Artemis." The silence that followed Annie's statement was heavier than the marble pillars holding up the roof. Julian stared at her, his brain misfiring. What did you say?" "Artemis." Annie repeated slowly as if speaking to a child. "Artemis Technology. The company you've been trying to court for 6 months. The proprietary algorithm you told the senator was revolutionary. I wrote it. I coded it at my kitchen table after you kicked me out while I was trying to figure out how to pay rent." Julian felt the room tilting. He looked at the senator. The senator looked thunderstruck. "You," Julian stammered, "you're a waitress. You don't know code. You don't know anything." "I have a master's in computer science." "Julian," Annie said coldly, "but you never asked, did you? You were too busy talking about yourself. When we were married, I put my career on hold to support yours. When you left, I got back to work." Silas stepped in, placing a hand on Annie's shoulder. He looked at the senator. "Senator Banks," Silas said. "As the majority investor in Artemis Tech and Annie's partner in both business and life, I'm afraid we have some bad news regarding the contract." Senator Banks stood up, sensing the disaster. "Mr. Sterling, surely we can discuss this. We cannot. Silas cut him off. Artemis Tech has strict ethical guidelines regarding the partners we work with. We do not do business with firms that employ morally bankrupt individuals. Silas turned his gaze to Julian. As of this moment, Artemis is pulling its bid. We are withdrawing the proposal, and we are certainly terminating our legal representation with Thorne and Associates. You can't do that, Julian screamed, his face turning a blotchy red. We have a retainer. I've spent hundreds of hours on this deal. My partnership depends on this. Read the fine print, Julian, Annie said softly. Clause 14. Section B. The client reserves the right to terminate the agreement immediately upon discovery of reputational risk. You are a reputational risk. At the head table, Beatrice Thorne looked like she was having a stroke. She knew exactly what this meant. Julian's firm wasn't just losing a client. They were losing the biggest government contract of the decade. And it was entirely Julian's fault. But the nightmare wasn't over. A man in a grey suit stood up from table 4. It was Robert Thorne, Julian's uncle, and the senior managing partner of Thorne and Associates. He had been watching the entire exchange with a look of pure horror. Mr. Sterling, Robert called out, rushing toward the dance floor. Mr. Sterling, please. Julian's actions are his own. The firm had no knowledge of this personal vendetta. We can assign a new lead attorney. We can... No, Robert. Silas said, dismissing him with a wave of his hand. The fruit is poisoned. You hired a man who treats people like dirt, and you let him loose on your clients. It reflects poorly on your judgment. Silas checked his watch that Patek Philippe again. Come, Annie. We have a late supper reservation at a place that doesn't smell like desperation. He offered his arm to Annie. She took it. They turned to walk out. Wait. Julian lunged forward. He was desperate. His life was crumbling in real time. He grabbed Annie's arm. You can't just walk away. You owe me. I made you. In a flash, the massive bodyguard from the SUV, who had been standing quietly by the door, materialized. He didn't hit Julian. He simply intercepted the movement, grabbing Julian's wrist and twisting it with professional precision. Julian yelped, dropping to his knees. Don't touch her, Silas said. His voice was no longer loud. It was a whisper meant only for Julian. If you ever come within 50 feet of her again, I will buy the firm you work for just to fire you. I will buy the bank that holds your mortgage and foreclose on you. I will dismantle your life brick by brick until you are back in that studio apartment where you started. The bodyguard released Julian. He collapsed onto the dance floor, gasping, cradling his wrist. Annie looked down at her ex-husband. She didn't look angry anymore. She just looked pitying. I didn't come here to ruin you, Julian, she said quietly. I just came to show you that I survived you. The rest you did this to yourself. Annie and Silas walked toward the exit. The crowd parted, instantly terrified and awestruck. As they reached the double doors, Beatrice Thorne suddenly found her voice. She ran after them, her heels clacking on the marble. Annie! Beatrice shrieked. Annie, wait, we're family. You can't let him take the contract. Julian is... He's just stressed. We can fix this. Table 19 was a mistake. Please. Annie paused at the door. She turned back one last time. You're right, Beatrice, Annie said. Table 19 was a mistake. You should have put me at table 1. I might have been merciful. With that, the doors swung shut, leaving the wedding of the century in absolute chaotic ruins. But for Julian, the worst was yet to come. The guests were still there. The senator was still there. And his uncle, the senior partner, was walking toward him with a look that promised murder. The heavy double doors of the grand ballroom swung shut with a finality that echoed like a gunshot. The latch clicked into place, sealing Annie and Silas on the outside and trapping Julian Thorne in the hell he had created on the inside. For 10 seconds, no one moved. The 300 guests, the creme de la creme of Boston society, sat frozen in their seats. The servers held pitchers of water, mid-pour. The band stood with their instruments at their sides, terrified to play a single note. The silence was absolute, suffocating, and heavy with the smell of expensive perfume and impending disaster. Julian remained on his knees in the center of the dance floor, cradling his wrist where the bodyguard had applied pressure. His face was a mask of shock. His brain was trying to process the last 3 minutes, but the math wouldn't work. Artemis. Annie was Artemis, the girl he had scolded for buying brand-name cereal because it was too expensive, was the architect of a 9-figure technology empire. The first sound to break the silence was the sharp, rhythmic tapping of dress shoes on marble. Senator Banks was moving. He didn't rush. He walked with the slow, terrifying deliberation of a man who could end a career with a phone call. He walked past the head table, past his daughter, and stopped directly in front of his son-in-law. Julian looked up, his eyes pleading. "Senator, Arthur, please. I didn't know. You have to believe me. It's a bluff. Silas Sterling is just trying to scare us." Senator Banks looked down at Julian with an expression not of anger, but of profound disgust. It was the look one gives to something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of a shoe. "A bluff," the senator repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You think Silas Sterling, a man who moves markets by sneezing, came to a wedding to bluff? He just terminated a $40 million contract in front of half the city council. Julian, I can fix it." Julian scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his wrist. "I'll file an injunction. We'll sue for breach of contract. I'll make the more. You will do nothing." The senator's roar made the crystal glasses on table 1 rattle. "You are radioactive, Julian. You brought a personal vendetta into a professional sphere. You lied to me. You told me your ex-wife was a leech. You told me you carried her. But it seems she was the one carrying you." The senator reached for a glass of champagne from a passing waiter's tray. He looked at it, then deliberately poured the sticky liquid onto the floor at Julian's feet. "This marriage is a fraud," the senator declared, his voice projecting to the back of the room. "And I will not have my family name attached to a fraud." He turned his back on Julian and looked at his daughter. Isabella was standing by the 5-tier wedding cake, her hands trembling. She looked small, lost in the acres of white tulle of her Vera Wang gown. "Isabella," the senator said softly, "get your things. We are leaving." Julian spun around to face his bride. This was his last lifeline. "Isabella, baby, don't listen to him. We're married. We just said our vows before God. You love me? Tell him you love me." Isabella looked at Julian. For the first time all day, she truly saw him. She didn't see the handsome, rising star lawyer. She saw a man sweating through his suit, terrified not of losing her, but of losing her father's influence. "I loved who I thought you were," Isabella whispered, tears cutting tracks through her makeup. "I thought you were a self-made man. I thought you were strong, but you're just mean. You're just a bully." "I did it for us," Julian pleaded, stepping toward her. "I put her at table 19 so she would see how great we are." "No," Isabella shook her head, backing away. "You put her there because you're still obsessed with her. You couldn't just let her be. You had to hurt her to feel big." She reached for her left hand. The platinum band encrusted with diamonds that Julian had bragged about for weeks felt like a shackle. She yanked it off. It was tight resisting, but she pulled until her skin scraped. She threw the ring. It didn't hit Julian. It skittered across the dance floor, spinning wildly, before coming to rest near the service entrance, right next to table 19. "I'm done, Julian," she choked out. "Daddy, take me home." The senator signaled to his security team. "Clear a path. Anyone who takes a photo gets their camera smashed." As the Banks family swept out of the room, taking the political elite and the bride with them, the vacuum in the room grew larger. Julian stood alone, hyperventilating. But the execution wasn't finished. From the shadows of table 4, a grey-haired man stood up. He adjusted his tie, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward the dance floor. It was Robert Thorne, Julian's uncle, and the senior managing partner of Thorne and Associates. Robert didn't look angry. He looked clinical. He looked like he was about to perform an autopsy. "Uncle Rob," Julian gasped, turning to him. "Thank God. You have to help me. We need to spin this. We can issue a press release saying Sterling was drunk. We can—" "Stop talking," Robert said. His voice was devoid of warmth. "You are currently speaking to legal counsel for Thorne and Associates, not your uncle." Julian froze. "What? You just caused a material breach of fiduciary duty," Robert recited as if reading from a textbook, "by engaging in conduct that resulted in the immediate loss of a key client, Artemis Tech, and by exposing the firm to reputational ruin, you have triggered the expulsion clause in your partnership agreement." Expulsion. Julian's knees went weak. "Rob, I'm family." "You are a liability," Robert corrected. "Silas Sterling is not a man who makes idle threats. He said he would audit us. Do you know what that means? It means he will put a team of forensic accountants on every billing hour you've ever logged. If you so much as overcharged a client for a postage stamp, he will find it, and he will bury us." Robert pulled a smartphone from his pocket and tapped the screen. "I have just sent an email to IT. Your access to the building has been revoked. Your company credit cards are frozen. Your email is archived. Do not go to the office on Monday. If you do, security has orders to escort you off the premises." "You can't do this," Julian screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "I have a mortgage. I have the lease on the Porsche. I have bills. You should have thought of that before you decided to play games with a billionaire," Robert said coldly. He turned to leave, then paused, looking over at Beatrice, who was sitting at the head table, pale and shaking. "And Beatrice," Robert called out, "don't call the house. My wife is quite upset that her nephew ruined the social event of the season. We'll be taking a break from family for a while." Robert Thorne walked out, and then the dam broke. The guests, realizing the show was over and the free food wasn't worth the awkwardness, began a mass exodus. There were no goodbyes. No one shook Julian's hand. They simply grabbed their coats and purses, eyes averted, whispering excitedly to one another as they scurried toward the exits. "Did you hear about the contract? I knew he was slimy." Table 19. Can you believe the arrogance? Within 15 minutes, the grand ballroom of the Sterling Grand Hotel, a room that cost $50,000 to rent, was empty. The band had packed up and left through the back. The waiters were silently stripping the tablecloths, avoiding eye contact with the groom. Julian walked over to the head table and collapsed into a chair next to his mother. The sweetheart table, meant for the happy couple, now held a divorced mother and her fired, annulled son. Beatrice stared at the empty room. Her hands were shaking so badly her bracelets rattled. We were the elite," Beatrice whispered, her voice sounding thin and brittle. "We were the Thornes." "Shut up, Mother," Julian said, dropping his head into his hands. "Just shut up." "I just wanted you to look strong," Beatrice insisted, tears leaking from her eyes. "I wanted her to know her place." Julian laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. He gestured to the vast, empty ballroom. He pointed to the waiters clearing away the lobster tails that no one had eaten. He pointed to the dark corner where table 19 sat, now stripped of its velvet rope, just a table by the bathroom again. "She knows her place, Mother," Julian said, his voice hollow. "She owns the place. We're the ones who are trespassing." 3 miles above the chaos, the air was calm. The interior of Silas Sterling's private Gulfstream jet was quiet, save for the soft hum of the engines. Annie sat in a cream leather seat, her shoes kicked off, looking out the window at the lights of Boston fading below them. She took a sip of champagne, a vintage rosé that tasted like strawberries and victory. Silas sat across from her, watching her with a soft smile. He reached out and took her hand. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Annie turned from the window. She looked at the man who had flown across the country just to hold her hand in a room full of sharks. She thought about the look on Julian's face, not the anger, but the confusion, the realization that he didn't know her at all. "I'm better than okay," Annie said, squeezing Silas's hand. "I feel light. For 3 years, I carried that marriage around like a stone. I thought maybe I was the failure, maybe I was the problem. And now, Annie smiled, and it was a smile that reached her eyes. Now I realized that I wasn't the problem. I was just out of his tax bracket." Silas laughed, raising his glass. "2 upgrades." "2 upgrades," Annie agreed, clinking her glass against his. "So," Silas said, pulling a tablet from his bag, "I was serious about Paris. The croissants are better, the architecture is stunning, and I happen to know a very talented software engineer who needs to scout a location for her new European headquarters." Annie leaned back, closing her eyes. The humiliation of table 19 felt like a lifetime ago. The shame corner had been the launch pad for the rest of her life. "Paris sounds perfect," she whispered. The jet banked left, turning toward the Atlantic, leaving the dark, empty ballroom of the Sterling Grand far behind. Annie Reed wasn't looking back. She had a billion-dollar company to run, a man who adored her, and a future that was wide open. As for Julian, he was right where he belonged, sitting in the dark, waiting for the bill. Wow, family. Talk about a total collapse. Julian and Beatrice really thought they could play chess with a grandmaster, but they ended up flipping the whole board on themselves. From the senator pouring that champagne to Isabella throwing the ring, every second of that ending was pure, unfiltered justice. But the real takeaway here isn't just about revenge, it's about value. Julian couldn't see Annie's value because he was too busy looking at himself. He threw away a diamond to pick up a rock, and he paid the ultimate price for it. What do you think happened to Julian after this? Did he end up working at a fast food joint, or did he beg for his job back? Let me know your theories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this saga of karma, luxury and betrayal, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow, so I can bring you more stories like this. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. I'll see you in the next video.